Hello, this is going to be a quick and short guide on how to play Spearmaster tank in Swords of Legends Online. Or so I hope it will be. Anyways, Dragon Tooth and Dragon Cleaver, these are your left and right clicks respectively. I will go over them more later. Heavenly Might, this is your stun / golden shell reducer. If you do not know what golden shell is, there is typically a bar underneath the health bar of an enemy. As you can see, it's kind of blacked out and hard to see right now. However, if you reduce that to 0, enemies get stunned and knocked down, generally. Siege, this is your trinket. This is for breaking CC, you know, the usual. Heaven's Fortune, this is your repair doggo. People use you to repair their gear. That's all Spearmasters are actually there for in the party. Rupturing Might, this is your interrupt. Please fucking have your DPS interrupt. I am so sick of not having an interrupt because tanks interrupt is 60-second cooldown, whereas DPS varies from about 15 to 25 seconds. So DPS should definitely be interrupting, especially Reapers, because you need that DPS, Reapers, please. Army Breaker, this is your dash. You have 3 stacks, just like DPS Spearmaster. Tiger Leap, pretty easy. It's just an elusive jump like Dragoon from FF14. Just moves you back a lot. Flanking, this is your dodge. It is a dodge. Very self-explanatory in that way. Wrath of the Spear. This is pretty easy to understand. You spend 25 rage to build a spear, which in this case it's Lion Dragon Seal, or Dragon Wrath Seal if you use Dragon Cleaver, which is your right click. This is important because this skill is an AoE aggro generation skill, effectively. If you read it, you know, generates a lot of aggro to nearby targets and blah blah blah. However, it will obviously change your seals from, you know, red seals to yellow seals depending on if you use it. Or rather, depending on when you use it. So you want to be very careful about what seals you are using to go into this mode, which I will go over later. Clouded Hands. This is your taunt. It's a taunt. It makes enemies attack you for 5 seconds, guaranteed. Good skill. Heavenly Fang. This is our pull skill. We are definitely inferior to Berserkers in terms of pulling. However, it does have a very wide range. So please get used to the actual range of this, because it's very important. If you target a immovable enemy, and there are a bunch of movable enemies around it, it will pull all of the movable enemies to the immovable enemy. However, if you target a movable enemy, it will pull every movable enemy to you, and immovable enemies will just simply be immovable. So depending on your target, it changes its effect. You want to be careful about this, because in dungeons, you can pull a bunch of trash mobs that are like off to the left, and it will yoink them all to the immovable enemy. However, if you target a movable enemy and you're standing like here, for instance, they will all get pulled to you, and then that huge immovable enemy is over there, you know? So you want to be sure what you're targeting is correct for the situation. Taunt, this is just your passive. Obviously, it takes effect when you know, use Clouded Hands. So yeah. Okay. Tank cooldowns, these are your big cooldowns, unrestricted. 20-second, you know, cooldown. It lasts for 5 seconds, and you take 20% less damage. 20% is quite a bit. I mean, especially given its cooldown is really, really short. It's a very good cooldown. Roll it whenever you generally can or need it. It's pretty self-explanatory. Fearless. This is your very, very big button. Like, I really need to mitigate everything right now. It's a 40% reduction for 15 seconds. This is huge. You use this in very big trash pools. You use it if you don't have your parry up for some reason for a boss like Tank Buster. It's a very good button with a very long cooldown, so make sure you use it well. Comprehensive Defense. This is like Wings in Final Fantasy XIV, where your party can stay behind you and get damage mitigation while you do as well. However, for the most part, you're not going to have people standing behind it, so you can, however, just tap it for a Tank Buster, get that bit of mitigation it gives you, which in this case is 35%, without the glyphs, or rather, Astral Blessing, sorry, which I'll go over after all this. So It's a good skill. So you can tap it and just move, and you got your mitigation. Alright, as for your DPS buffs, normally Great Hatred gives you aggro generation. However, because of a glyph I'm running, it is now a DPS cooldown, which is a very, very important thing in my opinion. But the big thing is sacrifice. Not accounting for haste, it has a 120-second cooldown, and Great Hatred, no matter what, will always be 60. So, the big thing about sacrifice, it regens rage for you, it summons phantoms to hit things with you. So say for instance you're just auto-attacking, it summons phantoms, which will hit with you, which, you know, is a very good thing. It increases your aggro generation as a whole. And yeah. But a big important thing about it is when you get hit with it up, you receive diligence stacks, which stacks up to 10, and each stack gives you 1% physical damage. So it's a 10% attack buff, effectively. And that's, you know, really strong. You generally want to pair this with Great Hatred in your opener, especially because their cooldowns are very, you know, Great Hatred is half of sacrifice normally without haste. So every 2 minutes you get them together, and every 1 minute you have Great Hatred on its own. And in this case, assuming you have the glyph, which I'll go over, it gives you 25% physical attack increase, which is a very, you know, good thing. There is another component to this with the glyph, which I'll go over when I get to the glyphs. So, Dragon's Roar. This is another very, very strong skill for increasing not only yours, but your entire party's DPS, because it puts a debuff on the enemy that stacks up to 5 times, but everything you do will put it to 5 regardless in this case. So it's 2% per stack of armor break. So it reduces the target's armor by 10% for 12 seconds. This is very good. You will have it for generally every buff window, because it is a 30-second cooldown, not accounting for haste. So you'll have it in your opener, you'll have it in your, like, you know, mini burst opener, you know, with just Great Hatred. You'll have it up for most scenarios that you need to have it up for. And yeah, so just make sure you use it when the boss goes down, when your DPS are bursting, when your DPS have their cooldowns up, and so on and so forth. It's pretty self-explanatory on how to optimize with it to increase your party's DPS. Anyways, blessings. For me, I generally use this entire middle row. This is what I consider just to be like the best DPS spec for Spearmaster tank. However, we'll go over everything regardless. So, Race to Heaven, it's self-explanatory. It gives your taunt 2 extra stacks, so you have 3 stacks of taunt. Personally, I see no need for this. If you feel you need it, feel free to take it. However, what I would always take is Preparing for War. Your Heavenly Fang, which is your pulse skill, applies 3 seconds of Dragon's Roar. So if you notice, it now applies 3 seconds of Dragon Roar, which is very good because that's 10% armor break. On top of the fact, it also taunts for 5 seconds, regardless. So this is not only your taunt, but it is also a defense reduction and a pull. So this is a, you know, triple threat skill, effectively. So, say for instance in a fight, you really need aggro, and you don't have your taunt up. So you, like, you know, you're on cooldown, and your taunt is gone, and someone else just ripped aggro. You just use that, and then, you know, it's just, yeah. You have, like, increased aggro because of the taunt passive. Aggro is applied to the next target, and you receive increased threat buff, you know? Very, very good. As for Cloud Fang, I don't think this works properly. If it does, then correct me if I'm wrong. However, I see literally no use for this. Reducing Heavenly Fang is a very good thing, in my opinion. However, even amongst trash pulls, you should be able to get by with 2 stacks regardless of your pull. As for your block, normally people run Indestructible from what I see, which is okay. I mean, it's a 4.5 second, you know, block that you can just hold, and it blocks up to 3 hits. It blocks up to 6 with the glyph, specifically. You receive 25% less damage, and, you know, it stops after receiving the 3 or 6, depending on the glyph. It's a long cooldown, it's 40 seconds, but you do have a lot of mitigation in this period. Like, it's very, very, you know, non-limiting, so unlike Great Wall. Great Wall is much more limited. It has a lower cooldown, but it only lasts for 0.4 seconds. So you have to time this very well for tank busters. However, the biggest thing about Great Wall is that the damage reduction is bigger than Indestructible for a singular hit though, not for 3 or 6 hits. But on top of that, 50% of the damage you take is converted into a dot that is on you, so it effectively reduces another 50% of the damage after the 30% reduction. So this gives your healers time to actually heal you back up so that you don't take a huge spike of damage immediately. It's very, very strong. On top of that, it reduces its cooldown by 5 seconds if you parry something, and if you parry, you know, the enemies take damage and it procs your Dragon Tooth variants. So if it procs your Dragon Tooth variants, it means you're empowered left and right click. So like, you know, it's like that. It procs that. Very good. I would always recommend taking this and just learning how to parry tank busters properly. Dragon Leap. Cooldown for your Dragon's Roar Comprehensive Defense are reduced. For now, in current content, I do not think this is required. The Dragon's Roar is a very nice thing to have on a lower cooldown. However, as it is, it fits most burst windows just fine. And Comprehensive Defense, you're only generally going to like tap it because you can see how it's still active. There's no reason to sit and hold it to begin with. But I don't think it's a cooldown that is required for Spearmaster in like 95% of situations. You only generally use it as a like panic button because you mistimed the cooldown earlier in the fight. You don't have Unrestricted or Fearless up or your parries. Like, it's really, really a panic button more than any of your other cooldowns, in my opinion. Especially because if you're pugging, pugs aren't going to stand behind you for, you know, your defense, so. Otherwise, Brave General is what I would always take, personally, because when paired with Great Wall now reflects 10 times the damage, which is very strong. You know, the target is forced to attack itself. I haven't seen this. I don't know how this works. It's pretty much irrelevant. Obviously, your right click will now become, you know, your Dragon Subjugation, which is this, assuming you've actually parried properly. Otherwise, normally you only gain access to Northern Lights Flame Spear, which is your left click. This gives you access to your empowered right click, which is a very strong ability. And if your target already has Dragon's Roar on it and you parry, it will reapply it. So yeah, very good. If for some reason you are running the Hold Guard, you know, Indestructible, it increases your skill damage for 12 seconds and increases your aggro generation with your left and right click. So it still has a good purpose even if you're not running Great Wall, which I would still run it for. However, if you want to play ultimate safe mode, you can run Guard Mountains because it increases Indestructible's 3-hit counters to 6 hit. So you can guard double the hits. However, you can also run this if you're running Great Wall, if you want to get used to parry timings. It makes it a little bit easier by giving you a 0.6 second window instead of a 0.4 second window. However, I still wouldn't take it. I would take Brave General every time. Okay, Very Kratos. This is a good ability, depending on how you see it and use it. If you use Sacrifice, which is, you know, your DPS buff, it turns your Unrestricted from 20% reduction to 50% reduction, which is a massive, massive cooldown. It's actually your best cooldown if you are in Sacrifice, assuming you have this blessing. So if for some reason you feel that you need the mitigation, this is a valid option to take. Altar of Heroic Souls. This is what allows your phantoms to spawn and hit enemies during your sacrifice window. You know, it also is what gives you additional aggro generation, and what also gives you the diligence stacks. So everything I said about sacrifice, most of it, except for the rage generation part, is because of this Astral Blessing. So this is the reason sacrifice is so good. Raise the weapon. I will tell you right now, I would never take this. However, it has its use if you really, really are like a safe tank. Crit resistance we can ignore for the most part. The big thing is that Sacrifice becomes an AoE taunt, which is very good. It also reduces the cooldown for Sacrifice and, you know, the presence, whatever it actually is. That is essentially just damage reduction if you were to look at this, you know? So yeah, it's just damage reduction effectively. So it's a valid option. I still wouldn't take it though. Comprehensive defense. This just makes your comprehensive defense a slightly stronger cooldown for damage. So from your allies it goes from 10 to 20, and from you it goes from 35 to 40, or 30 to 40. The big thing is that it increases physical attack for your team members by 15%. The only issue with this is people generally aren't going to sit behind your defense, for one. For two, there's nothing really in the game currently that you're going to use this on for more than as like a tap cooldown, like another parry effectively. So I don't see much reason to use this. However, maybe you have a use for it. And the big winner here though, I think, is total protection, because this makes your Wrath of the Spear have essentially a cooldown attached to it. See, I have no buffs, but if I do Wrath of the Spear, disregarding the mastery buff, the turtle protection, I have 30% extra aggro, I lose 15% physical attack, but I gain 6% mitigation and an 8% increase of healing. So it is effectively a button that is a cooldown anytime you have 25 rage. So if you really need this, you can press it. You can pair it with a parry, you can pair it with an restricted, you can just use it in trash pulls, which you generally want to be doing, depending on how DPS hungry you are at the very least. So yeah, very good. The other component to this, however, is that you're not permanently in the state, despite the fact that it is a permanent buff. If you right click, it removes it. So you can have it up and be like, oh yes, I have my cooldown, blah 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 blah, and assuming you're not doing your empowered right click, it removes it. So you can essentially toggle it on or off, and there's no real downside to having this. And on top of that, the skill doubles as a mitigation for your party. You know, 5 team members within 15 meters, they gain 20% damage mitigation for 10 seconds. So you press it, it doesn't even have an animation, and 5 members of your party take 20% less damage. Very strong. Phalanx defense. This is effectively cover from Final Fantasy XIV. You take the damage of whoever you've targeted. I don't think it's worth it. There's nothing in the game currently that warrants this. But, you know, if you really need it, go for it. Mess around with it. Okay. As for glyphs, all 5 of them are good, depending on your playstyle. So, there are 3 guarantees that you will always have. Sunset, Stratus, Clouds, and Trick. In my opinion, these are the 3 you will always have, no matter what. Sunset. During Great Hatred, the big thing is the whole power of the Black Dragon. That is when you use your right click, right? When you go into Northern Light Spear, which is your left click, it uses all 5 of your spears to empower your LMB and RMB. However, with Sunset, it only uses 1 stack to empower the 2. So I pop Great Hatred, okay? Now Northern Light Spear, it only used 1 stack. And then you can just go right back into it. So, you know, left click, right click, left click, right click, right click, essentially. It just lets you rotate your empowered autos for the duration of Great Hatred. And it even leaves you with 4 spears after it ends, generally, so that you have another one that you can just go right into after the buff has run out. Very, very strong glyph. Always take this. Stratus Clouds. This is important because Dragon Cleaver, which is your RMB, instead of generating 1 spear, it generates 2. So your 25 rage for your RMB gets you 2 spears, which also makes Wrath of the Dragon very, very bad because it's 25 rage for 1 spear. So you only really want to use this as like, I really need a cooldown button or an AoE pulls if you need the mitigation to begin with. Otherwise, rage to spear value, it is the absolute worst, and always use right click. Assuming you have Stratus Clouds. Trick. It turns Great Hatred from an aggro generation ability into a physical attack buff. Very straightforward. It is a DPS buff instead of an aggro buff. And I mean, for the most part, Sacrifice raises your aggro generation, parrying raises your aggro generation, using your Heavenly Fang increases aggro generation, you have a ton. There should be no reason that you need Great Hatred to be anything more than a damage buff. Honestly. So yeah. This is an absolute no-brainer. In my mind, these three, guaranteed. The two that you can debate on taking are Joint Battle and Repel Enemy. Joint Battle, when you enter Sacrifice, the rage that you gain from entering it is reduced by 30%. Personally, I think this is very negligible, and I will gladly take the extra 4 seconds of Sacrifice for that trade-off. However, Repel Enemy is also very good. You know, it increases the consumption of Dragon Cleaver and Wrath of the Spear, which is your right click, and, you know, my E in this case, by 8%. However, if, depending on your mark, which is, you know, your spears, if you have red spears, which you gain by using your right click, you will get a 10% damage buff. However, if you have yellow spears, which you gain by using Wrath of the Dragon, you will gain a 10% aggro buff. I don't think it's that great, because aggro is never an issue. It is good because you have a 10% damage buff when you have red spears. But, you know, it just kind of depends. But the big thing is it's the damage increase for your empowered autos. So it's not like it's a permanent buff, which is the only reason I wouldn't take it. However, I can see why you would still take it, because in your burst window, you are having a lot of empowered autos. It's like your entire burst is empowered autos, so it is still a very good cooldown. For now, I'm not entirely sure which I prefer to use, but for the most part, I've been sticking with the other one that increases my Sacrifice duration. Because I really like Sacrifice as a buff, personally. So I think it's pretty debatable between which are better, until someone really hard maths it. On paper, honestly, Repel Enemy is probably better, but for what I like, I prefer Joint Battle. So yeah, that is pretty much the entire breakdown of Spearmaster tank. If you want general tips, the biggest one I can give you, pre-charge your spears. Literally, before a boss, have 4 spears. It doesn't matter what color they are, just have 4 of them. So that way, when you have 4 and you go in and you right-click, you're already in your seal mode, you know? For your opener. There's no reason not to pre-charge your spears. Obviously, get good with the ranges and how your pull works. It is a very strong pull, but it's not as lenient as Berserkers, for instance. It takes a little bit more effort. We have a lot of aggro gen, we have a lot of physical attack up. We should pretty much never be losing aggro to DPS. Even DPS who are bursting very, very hard, which is pretty common. So yeah. As for opener, I will show you what I do currently. I'm not saying this is optimal or the best opener in any way, shape, or form. This is what I find works for me. So say, you know, this is pre-pull. Ready, check, pull down timer. You have 4 spears. Okay. You go in, you pop both of your buffs, you right click, you let your Northern Light Spear all go off, Dragon's Roar, empowered right click, and then you go in, you know, with just your empowered autos over and over and over. If your Dragon's Roar falls off, you can use your Heavenly Fang to reapply it. which you generally want to reapply it right before your empowered RMB, your Dragon Cleaver. You could also save it. I mean, it's also a very strong taunt because it performs taunt and makes enemies attack you and gives you like 30% aggro increased generation. So you don't really need to use your actual taunt, Clouded Hand. You can on pull and just use it for like the first 5 seconds, so it's guaranteed to you. So if for some reason the DPS bursts super hard in the beginning, it's not going to make that much of a difference. Because you have 3 ways to get aggro back instantly to you for 5 seconds. And for the most part, you are building a lot of aggro with Sacrifice and Great Hatred for, you know, increasing your DPS, which is effectively aggro. Anyways, I probably cut to this ending because I was either rambling or it was, you know, pointless information. So for the most part, it's a very straightforward class. I will add videos of me tanking hard mode bosses at the end, probably just one dungeon because I don't really feel like doing the others again in recording. And just to give you an idea of more or less how you should be playing the class. If you want basic tanking tips, just roll your cooldowns, make sure you have aggro, learn your pull range, and just don't be bad. Learn to parry, please. In DPS, please interrupt for us. Ours is on a 60-second cooldown while yours are on a 15 or 25, depending on your DPS class. And yeah, I stream on Twitch. Not just solo. If you are interested in that, feel free to follow me there. Join my Discord if you have any questions. I'm going to be maining Spearmaster, both DPS and tank spec. I swap between them frequently as is. I love them both. And yeah, I hope this helps someone. Have a good rest of your day, night, morning, whatever.